Hi everybody, it's Miss Webb here, and today I'm going to read you Cinderella. So, there was once a young girl whose mother had died when she was a child. She lived with her father and his new wife, who had two daughters. The daughters were selfish, lazy, and unkind, and because they were so unpleasant, their faces had become sullen and ugly. They made the young girl do all of the work around the house. She cooked and cleaned, washed and mended, fetched and carried. At night she was so tired she fell asleep by the kitchen stove, and in the morning she had ashes and cinders in her hair. The ugly sisters laughed at her and called her Cinderella. Cinderella's father loved her dearly, but he was often away, and she was very, very unhappy. One day, a grand ball was announced at the royal palace. All the girls in the kingdom were invited, because the king's son was looking for a wife. He will surely choose one of you, my darlings, the mother said to her daughters, who were beside themselves with excitement. Cinderella, make us beautiful, they ordered. So Cinderella helped them into their dresses of silk and velvet, piled their hair high with feathers and ribbons, and hung glittering jewels around their necks. When she had finished, she turned to her stepmother. What shall I wear to the ball? She asked quietly. The sisters shrieked with laughter. You? You're not going to the ball. Stay in the kitchen where you belong. And off they went, leaving poor Cinderella all alone. Cinderella sat by the fire, and she wept. Suddenly, an old woman appeared at her side. Come along, she said. We can't have this. I am your fairy godmother, and I'm here to help you. Dry your eyes, and you shall go to the ball. Cinderella stopped crying, and the old woman smiled. That's better. Now run into the garden and fetch me the biggest pumpkin you can find, and 6 little mice, 4 lizards, and the old grey rat who lives behind the gate. Cinderella did as she was told. With a wave of her magic wand, the fairy godmother turned the pumpkin into a golden coach. Then she waved her wand again, and Cinderella found she was wearing a beautiful silk dress and tiny slippers made of glass. Before her eyes, the mice were turned into 6 fine horses, the lizards became footmen, and the rat was transformed into a coachman with gold buttons on his coat. Have a wonderful time, my dear, said the fairy godmother, and dance to your heart's content. But there is one thing you have to remember. You must leave the ball when the clock strikes midnight. The palace shone with the flickering light of 1,000 candles. The magnificent ballroom was filled with the sound of music and laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the swish and rustle of fine silk and velvet. As Cinderella walked in, the room fell silent. Everyone was amazed at her beauty and wondered who she could be. The guests whispered to one another, but no one recognised her, not even the ugly sisters. The prince came up to her and asked her to dance with him, and when the first dance was over, he asked her again and again. Cinderella had never seen such a handsome man and had never felt so happy. Cinderella and the prince danced together all evening, blind to everyone else in the room. But suddenly, Cinderella heard the town clock chiming in the distance. Realizing it was midnight, she let go of the prince's hand and ran as fast as she could out of the palace and through the moonlit garden. As she hurried to her golden carriage, she stumbled, and one of her tiny glass slippers fell from her foot. The prince called after her, but she didn't turn back. The fairy godmother's magic lasted until she was out of the palace gates. Then Cinderella found herself back in her rags. The mice and lizards and the old grey rat scuttled away, and the pumpkin rolled off down the road. The prince picked up the glass slipper and held it close to his heart, and the very next day he sent messengers throughout the kingdom to announce that he would marry its owner. He went to the home of every young man and woman who had been at the ball until at last he came to the house of the ugly sisters. Cinderella's stepmother had rubbed oils and lotions on her daughter's feet to make the slipper fit, but it was no use. They were just too big. "Is there anyone else here?" asked the prince. Shyly, Cinderella stepped forward and curtsied. The prince slid the slipper onto her little foot. It fit perfectly, and even though she was no longer dressed in silk and lace, and there were cinders in her hair instead of flowers and jewels, he recognized the lovely girl he had danced with the night before. The prince knelt at Cinderella's feet and asked her to be his wife, and despite howls of rage from her stepmother and the ugly sisters, Cinderella smiled happily and answered, "Yes." So I hope everybody enjoyed Cinderella, and I'll see you all soon.